Hello and welcome to the National Security Conversation. Long simmering tensions between Palestine and Israel have escalated into a full blown conflict. It all began a month ago in mid April when the looming eviction of Palestinian families from the neighborhood of Sheikh Jarrah in East Jerusalem led to clashes between Israeli authorities and the Palestinians. In response, right wing Israeli groups marched through the streets of East Jerusalem chanting, "Death to Arabs." The situation soon escalated out of control and triggered riots across the city. By the 7th of May, clashes broke out at the Al Aqsa Mosque compound. Palestinians gathered for Friday prayers, clashed with the Jewish groups mobilized to celebrate the day marking the capture of East Jerusalem in the 1967 war. In the ensuing conflict, hundreds of Palestinians and around 20 police officers were injured. In response to the Israeli police action against Palestinians, Hamas, which has controlled Gaza since 2007, issued an ultimatum threatening an attack if Israeli forces were not withdrawn from the mosque compound and the neighborhood of Sheikh Jarrah. As the deadline passed, Hamas launched rockets into Israel. Israel retaliated by airstrikes in Gaza, razing high rise buildings, including one which housed the offices of Al Jazeera and the Associated Press. The recent flare up actually comes in the middle of an internal political crisis within Israel. It has gone through 4 elections in the last 2 years without a stable government. Benjamin Netanyahu, who is functioning as the acting prime minister, is also facing charges of corruption. An anti Netanyahu coalition, including the Arab parties of Israel, were very close to unseating Netanyahu when the crisis broke out and the coalition talks were called off. The crisis is now well into its second week. More than 200 Palestinians, including 61 children, and around 12 Israelis have been killed in this standoff. To throw more light on the ongoing conflict, I have with me Ambassador Talmis Ahmad and Ambassador Navtej Sarna. Talmis Ahmad is a consulting editor of The Wire and a former diplomat. He has been Indian ambassador to Saudi Arabia, Oman, and the United Arab Emirates. Ambassador Navtej Sarna served as India's ambassador to Israel between 2008 and 2012 and to the United States during 2016 to 2018. So welcome to the National Security Conversation, Ambassador Ahmad and Ambassador Sarna. Let me begin with you, Ambassador Ahmad. The ongoing conflict between Israel and Hamas or Palestine, if I may put it that way, is into the third week now. What caused this recent flare-up? What has been its, long-term and medium-term antecedents, and how do you think this conflict is going to sort of shape the regional sort of balance of power, as it were?
The immediate concern, as far as Palestinians are concerned, relates to the status of East Jerusalem. On 2nd May, eviction notices were handed out to 28 families, and because they had lost a particular case with regard to their right to stay in East Jerusalem. That was the original cause. There was agitation. But immediately behind that was the decision of the Israeli government that the Arabs living in East Jerusalem would not be allowed to participate in the Palestinian elections that were on the table at that time. They have since been cancelled. But at that time, there was already a concern that the Israelis were going to assert their claims on East Jerusalem. And secondly, and then this issue of the evictions. These people have also appealed to the Supreme Court. Now, this is the immediate cause. And then, of course, there was the issue, the Israelis went and blocked Damascus Gate. And during the evenings, during Ramadan, people go and congregate there and chat. And then, of course, as the demonstrations occurred, Israeli troops also entered Al-Aqsa. This is the immediate cause. In retaliation, Hamas had fired their rockets. They give advance notice, tell you the exact date and time, and they fire rockets. And that has since escalated into communal riots in mixed towns, which have not happened recently. And the thing has escalated. Massive bombings, missiles from Hamas in Gaza, massive demonstrations by the Arab Israelis as well as in the West Bank and Gaza So it has just gone out of control. Israel has launched massive assaults on Gaza and killed a fairly large number of people, more than 200, we are told, and about 64, 65 of them being children. The background is the serious issue is about the status of East Jerusalem. When East Jerusalem was lost to the Arabs in 1966, Israelis declared that West Jerusalem and East Jerusalem would be the united and eternal capital of Israel. So they've asserted a claim. But the rest of the international community has never accepted this. It has been treated as occupied territory. Israel is very clear. As far as East Jerusalem is concerned, it has several thousand Arabs staying there. Over a period of time, it would like most of them to go. They would have a process of Judaizing that area so that it becomes a truly Jewish capital of a Jewish state.
Right. Ambassador Sarna, let me sort of request you to throw some light on the American approach to what is happening in the region. On the one hand, President Biden has given his backing to the Israelis, saying that they have a right to defend themselves. On the other hand, he's asked for a ceasefire during a phone call with Netanyahu. What sense do you get of Biden's approach to the ongoing conflict? And how do you sort of contrast this approach with that of the former President Trump? And more importantly, will Netanyahu listen to Biden?
Well, in the context what Ambassador Talmiz Ahmed has explained, I think the US approach is always very important in Israel. So far, give or take, let us give or take Trump at the moment, the US has tried to play honest broker between the Israelis and the Palestinians. You will remember the Camp David Accords and so on, going back to certainly Jimmy Carter and Clinton. Biden's approach so far, Biden's administration's approach so far, I must say, the world has seen a somewhat unfocused, confused, dithering, because there was an expectation of Biden. There was an expectation of Biden that he would take a more human rights oriented approach and not, a straight default pro-Israel position like Donald Trump did. At the same time, this would naturally have to be balanced by the very strong pro-Israel, pro-Jewish lobbies in the United States, which is a reality. So nobody expected him to, suddenly say things against Israel or very pro-Palestinian. But I think there was an expectation that there would be a quicker reaction. It would have some human rights elements involved in it. But what happened was that, they reacted very vaguely. They sent a sort of mid-level envoy. They immediately asserted Israel's right of self-defense. And then, of course, blocked the Security Council from issuing a statement. They've got a bit of their act together now and are calling for a ceasefire, or saying that they're sort of working behind the scenes, possibly with Egypt, to work out a ceasefire. But I think overall, Biden's response to this crisis showed that America has more important things on its plate. They've been focused on the pandemic, on the economy, on the internal racial divide, on China, on Iran, rather than on the Israel-Palestinian issues. So that's what comes out today. But let us see how it goes in the days to come.
But if I could sort of ask a follow-up question on that. The absence of a certain human rights, sensitivity in Biden administration towards Palestine, a lack of clarity, and a lack of quick reaction, the three things that you pointed out. Do you think this is a result of having too many things on Biden's plate, or is it because of something else? Is there a larger politics or strategy behind that? You sort of spend a lot of time in the United States, and you know the city quite well.
Yes, I think, frankly, I think they have not got this as a top priority at the moment. So that has been the main reason. The second thing is that, uh, you asked about Trump also, which I didn't address in my last intervention. But Donald Trump, took a completely pro-Israeli situation on critical issues like moving the embassy to Jerusalem, and thereby recognizing it as the capital, and by recognizing Israeli sovereignty over Golan Heights. So he did give Netanyahu a lot of victories. Now, the important thing here is that Biden and Netanyahu don't like each other, and that's no secret. Biden has been publicly humiliated by Netanyahu on a couple of occasions. So we'll have to see how that plays into the game, how long Netanyahu stays or, stays on longer because of this. That's a separate issue, which we can perhaps come to later. But at the moment, I think it's not been top priority for Biden.
Right. Ambassador Ahmad, let's take a look at the domestic politics within Israel to see some of the origins of the current conflict. Do you think this escalation is a result of Netanyahu's own domestic political calculations? Just a week ago, his political career almost seemed to be over, but things are now picking up for him. On the other hand, the Israeli leader Lapid wrote on the Facebook the other day saying, and I quote, "If we had a government, security considerations would not be mixed with political considerations. No one would ask themselves why the fire always breaks out just when it's most convenient for the prime minister." What's your take on that?
Lapid has every reason to be seriously disappointed. He was putting together a government on the 10th of May, and even the cabinet positions had been finalized. It was an extraordinary coalition. You could call it center left. The left has not been anywhere in Israeli politics for more than 20 years. And you have had the stranglehold of the right wing in Israel, first with Ariel Sharon and then with Netanyahu personally. If he had got this government together, there would have been some extraordinary aspects to it. A first government in 20 years without the religious party, the ultra-right religious parties, first government without Netanyahu, and the very first government with Arabs as a part of the coalition. So this was going to be something extraordinary. Now, looking back, we don't have all the facts. We have read as much as we could of what is appearing in the Israeli media. I'm not sure if Netanyahu originated the problem, though he is known to be a magician and he's called Houdini and he's a survivor and he's an extraordinary politician, the most extraordinary politician that country has seen. I don't think he caused it, but he's the principal beneficiary of it. How has he benefited? Number one, that coalition that Lapid was putting together has more or less now in doldrums. Bennett has already said he can't be there. Bennett is a clone of Netanyahu. He also has very solid right-wing support and also from the religious group. So there's no way he is going to be now easily part of this coalition. Number one. Number two, the Arab partner, Mansour Abbas, is also shaky. He also has an Islamist background. And the last thing he would ever want to do is to be part of an of an Israeli coalition that has just killed 200 people in Gaza. So you have that is the major. The criticism that has come from Israeli sources is that Netanyahu has deliberately extended the assault. We are not military people, we are not Israelis, but people say that you could have halted it after 3 or 4 days. There is no need to have continued it for more than 2 weeks into the third week. What it is doing is preventing Lapid from, it is eating into that 1 month he has been given, last date being 2nd June. So there is this criticism that he has deliberately extended the conflict. And also his great strength is on television, he appears like the great statesman, great military leader, great diplomat, larger than life character. He's the one who is able to be the guardian and savior of the Israeli people. That's right. And they alone, they will, in all times of crisis, if you have to go to Bibi, you have to go to Netanyahu to save you. And that is what the strengthening of the right And the emasculation of the center-left coalition is one of the most important, most significant outcomes of what is happening today in Israel. So I think if this coalition attempt collapses, Lapid says he's not given up, but I can't see in the next few days how what he's going to do. He's no Houdini either. He's an old associate of Netanyahu. Whatever he knows, he's learned from Netanyahu, as has Naftali Bennett. These are old associates now fed up with him for various reasons: corruption, arrogance, hubris, whatever, misconduct, various reasons, individual politics, their own personal ambition. All of these factors may be there to distance themselves from him. But there is this, it's not easy. Israeli politics has never been easy for anybody. So I don't think they can. So what will happen is the Knesset has to now take a decision, try to form a government, because the president has tried his two options. Failing that, which is very likely, Netanyahu back as the caretaker prime minister for the next 6 months. He has survived 4 elections, will go into the 5th. He has never missed a day as prime minister. What an extraordinary man.
Ambassador Sarna, you've been India's ambassador to Israel. You know the politics in Israel. Like more than any of us. There are 12 days, as Ambassador Termis Ahmed pointed out. If there has to be a different government in Israel, do you think the opposition will be able to come together, or are there ideological differences going to increase? And is Netanyahu going to continue as the prime minister?
I think at the moment the odds are that he will continue, because not only the ideological differences, which are always there in that anti-Bibi coalition, the only thing they had in common was their antipathy to Bibi Netanyahu. Secondly, the Arab Israeli parties, as was pointed out, were very crucial for that coalition. And, besides what's happened in Gaza, what we must remember is that what's happened inside Israel, in the mixed Jewish Arab towns, on an unprecedented level, there has been mob violence, lynchings, and that divide is a permanent change, or certainly for the foreseeable future, as permanent as things are in this area. But so that is going to not allow this coalition to come together or to survive. So the chances are that we are headed towards a 5th election. And Bibi Netanyahu has bought himself time to possibly stay out of prison for another 6 months. He's come back as Mr. Security of Israel. So that's the, my money at the moment would be on him to survive. And he may not, as Ambassador Ahmed said, he may not have caused it, but he could have turned things in that direction, particularly in the provocations in East Jerusalem. And then certainly he's benefited and maximized his benefit from the way things have gone on in the last 10 days. And frankly, going back to the US, I think the US has wittingly or unwittingly helped him by delaying a strong reaction.
Ambassador Ahmed, let's sort of try and understand the political landscape within Palestine. So the elections to the Palestinian Legislative Council was scheduled for the 22nd of May, but were indefinitely postponed on the 29th of April. President of the Palestinian National Authority, Abbas, chosen for a 5-year term in 2005, has been in power for 16 years without elections. So what is the current state of the Palestinian polity and the competition between Fatah and Hamas? And what implications, this political landscape have for the peace process?
The divided nature of Israeli politics is readily reflected in the deeply polarized and divided nature of Palestinian affairs. Mahmoud Abbas is no great leader. He's been a lightweight from the beginning. He's a kind of coordinator. He's kept Fatah together over a period of time, enjoyed American and Israeli support to a certain extent. He has kept Hamas at bay, and therefore both America and Israel have every reason to be satisfied with him. But he has no new ideas, no inspiration, no leadership. The scenario in the Palestinian territories of the West Bank is abysmal. He has nothing to offer his people. Young people have today come up with very different aspirations. They don't remember the struggles of the 60s and 70s and the leaders then. For them, it is this gentleman. Hamas, on the other hand, is becoming increasingly popular. If I were to make a guess, I would say that at least 80% of Palestinians in the occupied territories would support Hamas. I want to make a very careful point here. The Palestinians are not Islamists. Hamas is an Islamist party, but it is much more. Its core cadre and its basic ideology is Islamist, but it also has an inspirational agenda where it seems to reflect the aspirations of the Palestinian people. It is a movement of resistance. In the absence of anything happening from Fatah and from the leadership of Mahmoud Abbas, Hamas looks a larger than life, more effective, more inspirational a group. There are other one or two names are mentioned from time to time. There is Dahlan, former security chief Dahlan, who is living in the UAE and is promoted robustly for the presidentship by the UAE. He is tainted with association with Israel. Even he was the security chief. He worked very closely with the Israelis, and I'm not sure he has much of a popular support. The one who has extraordinary popular support, he has charisma, he has leadership qualities, is Marwan Barghouti. Marwan Barghouti was the great young student leader at the time of the Second Intifada. He has been arrested by the Israelis and is in Israeli jail now for, I think, more than 15 years. He speaks fluent Hebrew, familiar with Israeli culture, but is a very strong willed Palestinian. If he was given the option, I think he would win the presidency hands down. But he's not going to be given that, very likely. So, if I were to look into a crystal ball, I would say you're going to have this mess for a long time to come. Hamas occupying one area, Mahmoud Abbas not looking at any change if he can help it. But then there will be an occasion where nature will take its course. And very likely there will be a scenario post Mahmoud Abbas when there will be a churn in politics. As you know, when Mahmoud Abbas rejected the election, it was with the full knowledge and approval of the Israelis because he doesn't want Hamas winning 80% and Israel doesn't want Hamas winning 80%. So I think that is the background in which the elections were cancelled. And now you have left a Palestinian community in occupied territory with absolutely nothing to look forward to, a deep sense of hopelessness.
Ambassador Ahmed, if I may ask a clarification, you do say that Hamas would probably get 80% support from the people in Palestine. Does it not indicate a certain radicalization of the process within the politics within Palestine? And what does that mean for the peace process going forward?
It is very difficult for us who don't live in occupied territories to understand the psyche of the Palestinian. Do recall in the case of Gaza, so many, more than 1 million people, nearly 2 million people live there, overwhelmingly unemployed, no economic life at all, periodically assaulted by the Israelis who destroy their homes and their facilities. And they lead a life, a primitive, pre-modern life, nothing to look forward to, a thoroughly hopeless life. This time, the West Bank people also resisted. The fact that they came out in such large numbers indicates a disenchantment with Mahmoud Abbas and the leadership at Ramallah today. This is my personal view, sitting from here. Therefore, the word radicalization is not the appropriate word because all Palestinians are already very, very angry. I was suggesting they are not Islamist. I don't think it's in the Palestinian psyche to be Islamist. Hamas is. But other than the top leadership, a large body of their cadre need not be necessarily Islamist in the sense that we are familiar with regard to the Muslim Brotherhood or even with the Morsi government earlier.
Ambassador Sarna, how do you sort of evaluate the international response to the conflict this time? I mean, compared to the previous occasions, the international community's response seems to be a little muted. I mean, there is, of course, you have the United Nations Security Council unable to sort of, put out a joint statement. There is some dithering, as you correctly point out, from the United States. Although Human Rights Watch just published a report, accusing Israeli authorities of committing crimes against humanity, etc. But looking at it from here as a diplomat, how do you sort of look at the international community's response to it? Because that response to it a great extent matters in sort of in the shape that the peace process might take in the years to come.
I think, on an international level, there is a kind of fatigue on this issue. Unfortunately, but there is a kind of fatigue. So the reactions are pretty pro forma and along predictable lines. That's the first point I'd like to say. For instance, we've talked about the US reaction. The UK reaction is also very sort of, both ways, kind of less against violence and deaths and civilian deaths. The European reaction, particularly the German reaction, again supports Israel's right of defense. On the other side, you have the Arab League, and we can come back to that, but the Arab League has been critical. As expected, the Iranians, the Turkish have been more strident on that. The interesting thing I would say is the reactions of the countries who have signed normalization deals with Israel. You have the Saudis, you have the UAE, you have Bahrain, you have Morocco and Sudan. Now, those reactions have been relatively muted, and they've been criticized by the others who saw these deals as somewhat, whether really or whether for real politic reasons, as stabbing in the back the Palestinians. So those reactions have been muted. Otherwise, I think what is significant is a lot of people are weighing India, are weighing their reactions depending upon their relationship with the Israelis and how important that relationship is. So I think that factor of your bilateral relations comes into play. And I'm afraid, we no longer live in a world in which there is a non-aligned bloc or a vast majority of the General Assembly which is going to, support the Palestinians, and the Palestinians, are aware of that because it's not that theirs is any longer just the flag-bearing cause led by Arafat. Which had this tremendous emotive appeal for the world. I think the problems within the Palestinian politicians have actually weakened their cause on an international level.
Right. Ambassador Talmis Ahmad, in a tweet last week, Mr. T.S. Tirumurthy, India's permanent representative to the United Nations, said that India condemned all acts of violence, especially rocket attacks from Gaza. While India did sort of mention the two-state solution, etc., it sort of singled out the attacks by Hamas. How do you sort of view this?
First, I want to make a few general observations and link that with what has happened. Yes, as Ambassador Sarna said, there is a fatigue. What has happened is that the Oslo Accords created conditions for interim arrangements, which are in place.
Right.
These interim arrangements were meant to go forward to final status discussions. Final status discussions relate to a Palestinian state, the settlements, the right of refugees, and Jerusalem. These are final status issues. On these issues, Israel is not willing to concede anything. And the Palestinians are in no position to concede anything. One attempt that was made by Clinton at Camp David II to address final status ended with no document emerging from that. From that day till today, 20 years have passed. There is no indication that you can move forward on final status. This is a decision, this is something that will at some stage will be resolved between Palestine, the people of Palestine, and the people of Israel. It is not something that we can discuss because there is no go on either side. Because of this, there is fatigue because nobody is in a position to contribute. Now, with regard to the Palestinian cause as such, I would suggest to you that from 1967 itself, the issue of Palestine ceased to be an Arab issue and became a Palestinian issue. The Arabs had shot their bolt, they tried their best, they had indulged in two wars, a war of 48 and 67, had been defeated summarily in both of them. It is therefore they were in no position to carry out a military confrontation. And since then till today, the military scenario has not changed on the ground at all. What has happened since then, and it's a natural process of a slow accommodation of the realities on the ground. What does the world do? That to the extent you can afford it, you provide benefits to the Palestinians in terms of development assistance. You make them schools and hospitals, equipment, some infrastructure support, salaries for certain people, etc. But you are not able to move forward their cause. This is where we are. As far as Israel is concerned, it is a viable state, it is an important state, it is a very valuable partner in different areas, it is a strategic partner for certain countries. And therefore, what you see today is each country provides development assistance for the Palestinians and has substantial bilateral relations with the Israelis. Therefore, it's not even any longer a question of balancing between the two because there is no balance.
That's right.
There is a lost cause and there is a viable state. So you deal with the lost cause in the way you can through assistance, charity, support international efforts from time to time. But there is no capacity in the international community to actually intervene to change the situation on the ground in any way, legally, politically, militarily, or what have you. Now, having ties with Israel is very natural. We've had ties with Israel from 1992, and our relations have become extremely successful. Now, with regard to the statement of our permanent representative, his statement reflects this balance that we support the Palestinian cause. We recognize that at some stage they will have a state of their own, and that we wish that that state emerges at some point. And at the same time, we are unhappy. Now, what about the statement? The statement is now loaded much more heavily in favor of Israel. It condemns Hamas. It is unhappy about the violence in general, but specifically condemns Hamas. The second point is it speaks of a Palestinian state, but does not mention East Jerusalem as its capital, which used to be the mantra consistently as far as India is concerned and most other countries in the world. Because more and more we have accepted that is the Israeli position that Jerusalem will be the united and eternal capital of the state of Israel. I think this statement reflects all the points that I have suggested to you earlier.
Right. Ambassador Sarna, let me bring to you 2 points. One, the whole, singling out the rocket attacks from Gaza issue in the permanent representative's statement. And second, about where does India stand on the status of East Jerusalem? You've been our ambassador, so what is your sort of take on how the Indian policy has evolved over the years and where it is today?
Well, we are, as has been explained by Ambassador Ahmed very, very, clearly, we are between these two things. One is our strategic relationship with Israel, which has grown by leaps and bounds, actually, over the last 3 decades. Not only security and defense, but also, other areas of importance to us like telecom, high tech, agriculture, water, And there's a lot of empathy. There's a lot of people to people. From every family in Israel, you will have youngsters who are traveling in India at any given time. Everybody finishes his army training and wants to come to Israel. They used to go to Brazil. More and more of them come to India now. So that connection, that relationship Israel expects that warmth will somehow translate into our multilateral positions. Now, it doesn't fully, because this is not just a single country relationship in which, the bilateral feeds the multilateral. But there is here a contradiction, and that is our long-standing support for the Palestinian cause, which is rooted not only in our value-loaded normative foreign policy of the 50s and 60s, but also in the real politic of our large Muslim population, in the real politic of our relations with other Arab countries. I mean, the Abraham Accords not coming into play. The traditional positions of Arab countries, we had to keep care of their sensitivities. And this, frankly, in my dealings with the Israelis, and I'm sure of subsequent ambassadors, these things come up when you talk to the Israelis or when they talk to you. But they understand, for the most part, what our problems are, what our predicament is. So they understand for the most part, and there is a polite pro forma protest. Please, you did not mention this, or you did mention this. Why did you have to say this? Why don't you vote abstain instead of voting against us? Somewhere we have adjusted that. In Human Rights Council resolutions, for instance, a couple of them, we have abstained where we used to vote, or we would have voted against Israel. And then we balance our statements. Like Tirumurti's statement. And then, since several documents over the last few years, we have dropped, as Ambassador Ahmed pointed out, the reference to East Jerusalem being the capital of the Palestinian state. So that is a nod to our growing relationship with Israel. At the same time, as far as East Jerusalem is concerned, we have our our legal position. We are committed to a two-state solution. So we have not changed that position. I mean, the two states may never happen, but increasingly, I think the mantra of the two-state solution is becoming a shibboleth. The reality is a one state. Which nobody wants to look at. But, it's emerging as a one state. But as long as we have the legality or the legal commitment in terms of resolutions, in terms of pronouncements to the two-state solution, East Jerusalem is on the other side of the 1967 lines. And therefore, East Jerusalem for us comes as part of the occupation. So that is the legal status. And that's what we have. But we have to recognize that in reality, if you want to do anything in East Jerusalem, it's within Israel.
Ambassador Sarna, you talked about the two-state solution not being a possibility, perhaps. So here is a hypothetical question. You think, the homilies apart, do you think two-state solution is a possibility? Is that likely to happen?
Well, looking at the realities of the moment, I think a two-state solution is... if not dead, it is certainly on life support. The two-state solution was firstly based on an adjustment of borders, on agreement on borders, or it was based on a certain amount of land going to the Palestinian state. Now, let's forget the other things. Just look at the land. I mean, this aggressive settlement activity over the since Oslo, has actually left very little land which is available to be traded for peace, and to roll back those settlements is virtually an impossibility. The two-state solution demands a division of Jerusalem.
That's right.
Today, I see no possibility of division of Jerusalem. Yes, a two-state can happen if the Palestinians are given a capital on, say, Abu Dis, which is outside East Jerusalem, and possibly they may or may not accept that. Will Israel accept a state who, on the Jordan River, whose security is not in their hands, whose airwaves are not in their hands? I certainly doubt it. So, if you have a two-state, you may have to involve Jordan, you may have to involve the Egyptians on the Gaza side, you may have to involve. So at the moment, and most important, a two-state solution requires concessions from both sides.
Right.
Neither side has the leadership today with the vision or the ability to pull its people together to make concessions. The mood in Israel is increasingly right. The mood in Palestine or Palestinian politics is increasingly divided and dissipated. There's nobody there who can actually make concessions. So I think at the moment, a two-state solution is a very distant dream. I think a one state, and many Palestinians believe that let's make it one state, let's enjoy the advantages of a developed Israel. But then you run into a problem of, will the Palestinians have the same political and social rights as the Jews in a Jewish state? So there is then the debate of a Jewish state versus a democracy.
Right.
So that is a debate which I think nobody at the moment is seriously willing to address.
Right. Ambassador Ahmad, there seems to be an emerging view in India that India has managed to somehow balance the relationship with the Arab world on the one hand and the Israelis on the other, quite in a healthy manner, in a manner that is suitable to India's national interests. Do you agree with this view?
You see, it's a mistake to use the term Arab world because it gives the impression of a monolithic collective entity. There has been no period in history of these people where this has been a reality. And particularly after the First World War, there have been a sense of nationalism, not so much Arab nationalism as nationalism of the states concerned. This is an old dilemma with which you as a history scholar would know. So I don't think there is any such situation. India's approach to West Asia is founded on two principles, and those principles remain. One, that it is bilateral, and second is that it is transactional. These two principles govern all of India's relationships with West Asia. Right. And this has enabled us up to now to have relations, substantial ties with Iran, with Saudi Arabia, with Israel, with the UAE, with Qatar, with all the countries concerned. Why? Because each relationship is a standalone relationship with lot of advantage and benefits to both sides. This is what I have called transaction. And I think the region has understood this. And indeed, I would say accepted it. That they have never expected India to either play a larger role than it is capable of playing in the security or in the promotion of security of the region as a whole, or nor have they ever complained about a relationship that we have with somebody else. In all the long period that I have spent, say, in the Arab states, in the region as ambassador, Saudi Arabia, Oman, UAE, and then again Saudi Arabia, not once did any country ever tell me that we are concerned about your ties with so-and-so or with so-and-so. They accept the fact that they will have certain issues amongst themselves. And those issues are constantly evolving. Who would have expected that there would be a dramatic normalization initiated by the United Arab Emirates? Many of us who are familiar with this would not give it too much importance. I mean, let's not get carried away that there is a fundamental shift. Yes, it's an important development. I personally do not ascribe to the term Abraham Accord. I think that is a completely misplaced term. Abraham Accord will occur when there is a settlement between Israel and Palestine. Till then, we have to accept normalization, happens on its own merits. After all, we normalized in 1992, so many years after we had become independent with Israel. We had a normalization, established diplomatic ties in 92, and those ties have gone forward. So countries from time to time will emerge in a set of circumstances and seek out a relationship with Israel. It's a reality. It has been a reality consistently from 48, when most of the countries of the world accepted it as a legal entity. And since 1967, there cannot be and has not been any challenge to its right to exist. And the issues that Ambassador Sarna has raised are the core issues. What is Israel's identity? Israel was constructed at the edge of the Mediterranean, at the edge of Asia on one side and the edge of the Mediterranean, as a Jewish state.
Mhm.
It answered the need of the Jewish people, who were a people without a state of their own. And their founders of the Zionist movement had said that you are persecuted because you have no state, that from time to time pogroms, etc., which had to experience over 2000 years. The idea was that once we have a state, we will be safe. Not that every Jew in the world has to come to Israel, but the fact that Israel exists is good for the Jewish community. The issue is now you have a problem, because when you arrive back 2000 years into the Holy Land, you already find people living there.
That's right.
The pretense of the Zionists that there is nobody there, that there is a vacant space of land, and that I have a leasehold on this vacant space due to the Old Testament, is a messianic aspect of giving a sacredness to land for the completion of your identity as a Jewish people. That is the issue. When Ambassador Sarna speaks of a one-state solution, it is a solution which will ultimately happen. It is a solution where a wide variety of people of different races and communities and denominations live together in a democratic environment called the State of Israel, but no longer a purely Jewish state, but a pluralistic, multinational, multicultural, multi-ethnic state, a democratic state where all people are equal. Today, you have the State of Israel, which legally discriminates against its 20% Arab community, who are its
That one state, will that include the current Palestinians? Is that the argument?
absolutely. It will be the state of Palestine, the original state of Palestine. There was a state of Palestine under the mandate.
Mhm, mhm.
What has happened is that in the mandate, after the 48 war, West Bank was given to Jordan and Gaza Strip was given to Egypt.
Mhm.
In the 67 war, Israel took West Bank, East Jerusalem, and Gaza back, gave to the Egyptians Sinai, and that was the end of that. So when we speak of occupied territory, this is the state of Israel. The state of Israel as it exists and the occupied territories forming one state. And I think most people would be happy if it is called the state of Israel, but it will have to be a democratic state where all people are equal. We have a long way to go. But these things happen. When you have a messianic order which believes in a certain faith-based politics, it evolves over time, sometimes over decades, sometimes perhaps over a few centuries. It evolves and becomes a multilateral, it becomes a pluralistic. You have, as in the case of India, the opposite is also true, that a pluralistic state takes steps backward and attempts to shape a faith-based entity. So you have politics constantly evolves, it's in flux, and different kind of ideas come up, have a certain resonance, step back, some other fresh ideas, perhaps promoted by certain leaders, come up. So there is a flow of history, and we are just observers of a certain portion of it.
Ambassador Sarna, what is your take on what Ambassador Talmis Ahmed just said, the one state sort of solution as if we're going forward? Where do you stand on that?
No, I agree. In fact, that's the point I had referred to in my last intervention, that, there is the one state option is frankly at the moment the only option. If the two state is not going to happen, and the 7 million Palestinians between the river and the sea can't be all sent away, and nor will the Jews leave what is their homeland, then what is the solution? A solution could be a federation, which is a kind of a two-state, which is not happening, or it could be everybody together. Now, when you say everybody together, it's not an easy thing to happen, because I mean, till last week, you may have thought that, oh yeah, 20% are Arabs in Israel, and all you have to do is give them equal social and political rights. But for that, you have to change the fundamental, you have to virtually give Israel a new constitution. And then you have to take into account the kind of violence that has happened in these towns, and what will happen if everybody lives together. Will it be a peaceful state? Will there be an agreement to give social and political rights equally, regardless of religion? I think it's a very far cry at the moment, but I think this is an option which is now openly discussed in circles who deal with this region. And it's not going to be easy, as I said, but then they seem to have missed the bus for the other option.
I'm very conscious of the time, but I have to ask this question as probably the final question. Hamas, what is this political entity called Hamas? I mean, the United States, EU, and several other countries consider it a terrorist organization. China, Turkey, Egypt, Syria, Iran, Qatar do not. So how do you sort of look at this political entity? Ambassador Ms. Ahmad, yourself first, please.
Hamas emerged in a certain political context relating to Palestinian politics. That you had the Palestinian interests represented by Fatah, and the larger organization referred to as the PLO, which was a secular entity and attempted initially to use violence, and later on, from Oslo, started being more accommodative and did an interim arrangement, hoping at some stage you would have final status arrangements. Hamas reflects an alternative idea. It is anchored in political Islam, as opposed to Fatah, which is a secular entity. Therefore, it emerges from the ideology of political Islam as reflected by the Muslim Brotherhood. So it is an alternative point of view. So you have in a competition within Palestinian politics of two forces in play, the secular forces represented by Fatah and the Islamist elements represented by Hamas. It is said, and Ambassador Sarna might dilate on this later, there is a conspiracy theory relating to the origin of Hamas, that Hamas's origins were encouraged by Israel to undermine Yasser Arafat and the Fatah movement, which was a unified movement at that time. It was possibly encouraged by Israel to emerge. I personally, and I have done internet research, and if you do internet research, you will always find a piece of paper that subscribes to the most extreme conspiracy theory you may wish for. And yes, there is material available on the internet with regard to this theory. But I am less interested in it, how it emerged. It is today a fact of life. It's a fact of Palestinian politics. It has to compete. When they competed in a free and open elections and did well, the results were not acceptable. They were not acceptable. They were branded a terrorist organization. The results were not acceptable within the Fatah, and they were not acceptable within the international sections of the international community. Hence, Hamas, where it has a huge body of domestic support within Gaza, separated from this and went off to Gaza, where it is now a supreme authority in Gaza. But there is therefore a deep divide in the Palestinian political ranks, which has of course harmed the cause. But their interests are not reconcilable. There's no meeting point between the two, between Fatah and Hamas as of today. So what has happened? Fatah enjoys the support of the UAE and Saudi Arabia and some large sections of the international community. Hamas is backed by Turkey and Qatar, reflecting the ideological divisions within West Asia, which have become so palpable today. So a lot of funding, development assistance, salary support, support for infrastructure development comes from Qatar. And the Qatari Amir, the former Amir, used to be a regular visitor with full Israeli support, because the Israelis recognize that if you have funding there and some developmental activity, it will keep the region pacified.
That's right.
Otherwise, the people get onto a boil and you have to use violence against them, which is happening today. I think when it all settles down, Qatar will be back with some degree of support. What Mahmoud Abbas has done, it's very easy for me to say this sitting here in Delhi, is that if they had had normal elections, it is very likely that Hamas would have done well and you would have had a unified movement. But Israel is not supportive of Hamas. And this is a problem. Israel is terrified that this alternative force, reflective of a Muslim ideological, Islamic ideological background, is viewed as the enemy by Israel. So Israel will do everything possible to subvert the Hamas's aspirations to become the leader of the occupied territories, because then there is no accommodation, no constant confrontation. They have not reached the stage where you can do business with them, between each other. And as you know, in the world, anybody you actively dislike, the easiest thing is to brand them a terrorist. And therefore, a lot of countries have said Hamas is a terrorist movement. Well, they themselves would say that today we whatever the violence what happened earlier, by the way, you remember PLO was a terrorist movement, and they in fact did serious acts of terror, including hijacking of aircraft, etc., and killings of people. If it comes to terrorism, if you look at the concept of state terrorism, a lot of states with which we do business on a daily basis, United States and Israel, would be academics would call them their actions as part of state terrorism. So many other countries. So this terrorism itself, for example, many countries have labeled Muslim Brotherhood as a movement, as a terrorist movement, because they see an ideological challenge to the political status quo in their own country. So there is very little value in these labels, which are opportunistic and which can be reversed because when political circumstances change.
Sure.
As of now, Hamas is a formidable presence among the Palestinians. And there is another thing I will say, make one more observation, that once you have accommodation and dialogue, the entities change. If an aggressive entity becomes an accommodative entity and later on becomes part of the political process, we've had in our own northeastern region a lot of very aggressive characters who are today chief ministers and leaders of parties in power. So that kind of accommodation has not yet happened. There is a time when this becomes acceptable or propitious. That time is a long way off. We have a long way to go. Any discussion of Palestine and Israel has two entities where there is not even a single meeting point. As you know, in Camp David II, the maximum Barak could offer was not minimally acceptable to the Palestinian side. Though both wanted settlement, both were desperate for settlement. And from Barak's point of view, he accepted a lot. He offered a lot. And if today, when you read the literature, you will see that we offered so much and these Palestinians only want war and therefore we couldn't offer it. But objectively, they can't. It is not minimally acceptable. It's like some of the intractable issues we have between India and Pakistan.
Right. Ambassador Sarna, any final thoughts from you on either on the Hamas or on what happens next going forward?
Well, I think I wouldn't want to, try and add anything to that masterly explanation on the Hamas by Ambassador Ahmed. I would only say that out of the current conflict, I think Hamas is probably going to emerge as a stronger entity in Palestinian politics for the foreseeable future, because the Palestinians would really have to go to the drawing board and get a relook at the entire structure of the Palestinian Authority, the leadership, the structures, the programs, the mission. There's nothing virtually left there at the moment. So at the moment, it's going to be Hamas has gained politically in terms of its image as a protector of Palestinian interests. The second thing is, and people in Israel often say that, Qatar is behind Hamas, so why don't they give some money and make Gaza like Dubai? And then all the problems will be solved. That may not be such a wild idea if nothing else happens. But I think, again, we are very far away from that. As to what is going to happen, I have a feeling that sooner or later, maybe a couple of days, we'll have a ceasefire, we have a de-escalation, we'll have, we need to reach a point where Netanyahu can claim victory. Mm-hmm. And I think he will have seriously damaged Hamas's infrastructure in these 2 weeks. Their tunnels, a lot of the commanders would have died. So I think they would have set back Hamas's military capabilities, perhaps by several years in this process. So I think soon we'll have that. We'll return to an uneasy sort of peace, which will then bubble up in some clashes somewhere, But then let us remember that I reached there in 2008, and 2008 was the first Gaza war. We are already into the fourth Gaza war. So that's, in 13 years, you have had 4 wars. This is a cycle of violence. And I think it'll carry on. It won't be one long conflict. Thank you.
Brilliant insights from both of you. Thank you so much for this conversation, Ambassador Naftesh Sarnath, Talmis Ahmed. And thank you so much for this. This was a masterly sort of explanation from both of you. Thank you so much for joining the show.
To receive instant updates on all videos from The Wire, click the subscribe button and hit the bell icon. Pay to support independent journalism. Click the link in the description and choose the amount you want to pay.